Okay, so what we're going to talk about right now is once you've got a character that you have created in Fuse and you've got the animations down and you are ready to get that character in Unity and get them animated. So the next few demos that we're going to talk about are basically about how you're going to prepare that character and you're going to get them all ready for your video game. You're going to set up some basic animations, and then you're going to take those animations and you're going to call them in code in Unity. So you can see, and this is really basic. Once you get the idea of how this all works, you'll get the idea. And once you get the idea, basically you can do any animations you want. Now, this is going to be simple. I'm going to do a demo sometime in the near future on something that's going to be a little bit more complicated, which is something called blend trees, but we're not going to go there. Okay, so let's just say I've got my enemy character here, and actually what's funny is this character was not done correctly, and we're going to show you why that is and how that came about and what to do about it, and then we'll talk about all the different options that you have when something isn't perfectly right. So I've actually got a couple different characters here. I've got this soldier guy, which is right here, and when you bring them in, you can click on the Blender object in your in the project tab. If it helps you to see it like this, then you can see it there. And when you do that, you're gonna see over here in the inspector, you have a whole bunch of stuff kind of starts happening. It's really kind of cool. First off, you get this little gridded view, and you can kind of hit play, and it's going to show you the animations that you have in your character's Blender file. The next thing that you're going to do is you have a couple tabs up here, and we're going to come back through this a little bit. I'm just going to go over these three tabs: the rig and the model. Now, if I take the model here and I take a look, there's just tons of stuff that you can set on these rigs. Keep quads, generate colliders, all that sort of stuff. I generally always use everything here as it comes into Unity. So I don't generally do anything changing all these. And you can play with this. The generate colliders thing is kind of fun to play with, but I like to do my own because I like to use them in the code. So anyway, the second thing, and really important, is the rig. And right now you can see that it's set to generic. If I set it to humanoid, and this is if you've done your rig correctly, you should be able to set it to humanoid. So if I set it to humanoid and then I try and hit apply, on this guy it's going to come up with an error. So let's just hit apply and then let's wait. Now it does take a little while to do these applications. Whenever you hit the apply on a rig, it's a pretty complicated character. It's got a lot of mesh, it's got, you know, bones. There's a lot of things that that Unity has to kind of import to see what's happening, and I'm not quite sure why it takes so long, but it does. So we're just gonna kind of wait for it to be done. Let's just see what happens here, and then once it comes up with the error, I'll go back to the other one that does not and kind of show you what you can do. Okay, well, actually it seems to have worked. This is kind of funny, but it's really good. I have done this in the past with this particular model, and it actually wasn't working. I'm not actually sure why. I do have one thought. When let's go back to the thing. When you have hip bones, one of the things that's really important is that the hip bones actually need to be, let's go to edit mode here. So when you have the hip bones, you will have a parent for that hip bone here. Okay. You can see that the abdomen and it's connected, and that was something that I actually did not do before, is they weren't connected, and then what they were kind of down here, and Unity said that it didn't like that because the hip bones weren't parented to the armature, the core of the armature, so it threw an error. I changed it, and actually it didn't change in real time, so I thought that there was something still wrong with the model, and there wasn't. But we'll actually show you, show you one other thing with a different model really quickly, and you'll see what you can do with it. So because I've got a humanoid rig, one of the things you can do is you can go into the configure tab here. You can just click configure. You can kind of go through here and you can identify each bone. You can reassign them. You've got all sorts of really awesome options that you can do to kind of make the rig work better and to test it and that sort of stuff. There's all sorts of crazy stuff that you can play with, muscles and settings. I'm not even going to get into that because most of the defaults are exactly the way that you would want them. The whole thing is perfect. So you can hit done. If you went into configure, you probably didn't. And so now we're basically ready. And here we have our animations. So if I go to the animation tab here, this is kind of where we started. You're going to see it's going to say default take, maybe armature action, ready, whatever. What you're going to do is you're going to delete all but the first one. And then if you did your character correctly, when you go into Blender here, you're going to have, let's see if I select all. Oops, I'm in edit mode, so go back to pose mode. And you'll see that I've got these groups of animations. So here's a walk cycle, here's a run cycle. And that's just kind of a standing around. And then here, that's an idle. And he's turning his head. See, and then here at the last, I have like a dying animation. So what we're going to do is we're going to set these frame spaces to certain ones. So my idle here starts right here at 250. Okay, and it goes till 350. So that's pretty good. So I'm going to go back to Unity, and I'm going to set this. I'm going to call it idle, and I'm going to take my 250, whoops, to 350. Okay. And then you can see it kind of gives you some options here. It says, is the loop, does it match? It tells you if everything that's looping works. And the idea is that your first keyframe and the last keyframe need to be the same. And if they are, then you should have a whole bunch of green lights here, and it basically says you're ready to go. So once you do that, you can hit apply. And what it's going to do is it's going to apply that frame set that you have to that action. And that's actually really important for what we're going to be doing, to be calling these animations with our code. So once we get that done and we have all these animations set up, we can call the animations with our code. So let's see here. Now, it does take a little while to apply. You'll notice it took over 5 minutes to apply the humanoid setting to the rig. Underneath the rigging tab, and when you apply these animations and you're setting the keyframes, it's pretty comparable. It usually takes about another 2 or 3 minutes each to kind of set the animations up. So you do a little bit of waiting here. It's kind of frustrating, but it's not horrible, and you get a lot done in a quick period of time once you kind of know what you're doing. So let's just wait for this to be finished. You can kind of see everything that's happening here. It looks good because I've got the green lights and everything like that. While it's doing that, let's head back to Blender really quickly, and you can kind of see what we've got here. And I just have these different sets of animations. And the other neat thing about this is you can constantly just add new animations and go back into Unity and whoops, and you can oops, it's not liking that because Unity's thinking, and you can just keep adding these animations into the list. And then I'm going to show you in just a second how to use an animation controller and how that animation controller can be our will control the animations that we're going to call in the code. So now we just kind of wait for this to apply. Okay, so it's done. I wasn't paying attention. So now I have the idle animation, and what I can do is I can just add another one. So I'm going to go back here, and let's just see what our walking animation is going to be from. So I'll just click here. And in Blender, one of the things is to find out if you're really on the keyframe. Right down here, it tells you the frame number, and it tells you whichever bone you were selected last or whatever, and the object. But most importantly is it's orange. which is not normally orange if you're, or yellow I should say, not orange. I'm not colorblind, honestly, I swear. So it's yellow here, and then if I click, off of that, so it's frame 75, see it's white normally. So frame 75 to 110, that's our walking animation. So let's go back to Unity, 75 to 110, so we'll say walking, and frame 75 to 110. And you'll notice that the loop match is all set. So I scroll down and I hit apply. Now this one should take a little less time because it's a much shorter span of keyframes. So the import's going to take a lot less time, actually a lot less time. Okay, so now that we have our walk animation set up there, we can add another one. Okay, we're going to do our run, which starts at 130 and goes to 160. I'm going to call this running. Oops. 130 to 160, right? I always do that. I always forget. 130 to 160. Now, actually, one of the things that I realized I forgot to do, I should call this enemy 2 running 130 to 160. Now, you'll see that the the loop match is pretty good. Here, there's a yellow caution. Something about the root transform position. That usually isn't a big deal. So I'm actually going to leave that, and you just hit apply. If you've got a caution there, most of the time, especially if you have a humanoid, Blender is going to take care of it. Now, why I mentioned that this was going to be, why I should name this enemy 2 running, if you've got multiple enemies, or you have a player character and player character animations or whatever, I find it really helpful to actually name the actions for the character that you're using them for. So enemy 2 needs to have his animations named as enemy 2. And the reason for this is when we get to the character controller part and we're selecting our animations to go into the controller that's going to control this character via the code, one of the big things that's a big problem for this is the fact that you'll get this big drop-down list of animations. And so if you've got 5 of them called running, then it's going to be really difficult for you to figure out which one is which. So actually, I didn't do that with the previous 2, and I really should have. One of the real important things that you do is name the animations based upon the character. So it's usually a really nice little tip that I have for you that'll really help a lot. Okay, so it finished up here. So now what I'm going to do, unfortunately enough, is I'm going to go back in. And in order to rename these, I'm going to have to go through this all over again. So enemy 2 walking, and then actually I wonder, will it stay? Oh, it will stay, so I don't have to worry about that. So I can just change the name by hitting return, and it should be good. Enemy 2 idle. Okay, so now we have these. I'm going to kind of skip ahead here, and you get the idea. And you would want we've got the idle, we've got the walking, we've got the running. Well, let's just do the last one. We've got 4, right? So we've got walking, we've got running, we've got the idle, and we've got the dying here, right? That's one right there, and it starts at 380, and it goes to 385. So 380 to 385. That's pretty fast, actually. But I'm going to show you how we can slow those down, too. So let's add another one here. And I'll just go to enemy 2, dying, and 380 to 385. There we go. There's no loop match or anything like that. It's interesting. So now we're just going to hit apply, and we'll just wait until that one takes, and then I'll take you through the next ones here, and we'll go from there. Okay. So that one's there. So we've got enemy 2 idle, enemy 2 walking, enemy 2 running, and enemy 2 dying. So now it's time to start preparing our character for whatever we're going to do for the animations and stuff. So first things first, I'm going to go over to the hierarchy. I'm going to select my FPS controller. I'm going to hover over the window here. I'm going to hit F, and that's going to zoom me in to where I put the first person controller. And this is kind of where we're going to bring everything together. So fine, and then secondly, I'm going to go back down to the project here, make sure I'm in the folder for my enemy. I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new prefab. So there we go. Call it enemy 2 prefab. Now I'm going to take the enemy Blender file that I've got here. I'm going to drag that into the prefab, and I'm going to take that prefab and I'm going to drag it right out onto the scene. Now, one of the really important things is if your character kind of gets messed up or doesn't show up right, maybe it comes in halfway through or whatever. One of the really big things that's important about about Blender and about how Blender works is the feet of the character and all the objects. The base of those objects should always be down here at the bottom between the feet, right at the grid. And Unity really wants that to happen, so it's really important to kind of keep that in mind. But as long as everything's good, or comes in like this, you're good. The other thing that's important is to kind of keep in mind your scale. So obviously that's a little big. I'm thinking about 0.45, if I remember correctly here. That will give me, there we go. And let's see, take a look at how that looks. So then what I always like to do is I'll hit play and I'll kind of walk up to the character and kind of look. So right here, the character, the first person controller is right at about his armpit. So that's probably still a little bit too tall here. So click on the prefab and let's go 0.4, 0.4, 0.4, and that should be good. Let's see how that goes. Yeah, now we're really looking at him right around, eye to eye. I think that's really important, so it's good. All right, here we go. So now that we've got this all taken care of, we need to kind of start playing with how we're going to get these animations to be assigned to the prefabs and to the characters. So first I'm going to hit apply again, so I've got my scale and it's going to be there. Now what I need to do is I need to make an animation controller. So one of the things you'll notice is on your prefab here you have an animator component, which is right under the inspector. And so what I do is I'm going to go up to my assets, I'm going to right click in the project window here, and I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it My Controllers. Okay. Now you don't have to do this. I know some people like to actually put the animation controllers inside the folder with the Blender file. It doesn't really matter. The important thing is you keep track of them, right? I like to put them in a folder here for my controllers. I'm going to right click. And I'm going to go to create again. And now I'm going to create an animator controller. I'm going to call this Anime2 controller. Okay, so now we're basically ready to go. So what I'm going to do is go back up here. I'm going to click on that prefab, and then right up here we see the controller has no controller in the space. So I'm just going to take my Anime2 controller, I'm going to drag it on up in here. So now I've got the Anime2 controller in there, and I can actually double click it. And then down here we're going to have this. Now I like it. Let's see, I'll tear this out here, put it up here. It's just a little easier for me. So now what you have is this is your animation controller, and this is where we start bringing our animations in and we can control them with our code. We're going to get this set up, and I'm going to end this. This is part 1. We're going to end this, and I'll show you how we get them all set up for part 2. We set the prefab up a little bit more and add our code. So first we have our base layer. We're just going to keep this base layer as our standard. We're going to do this very simply this time. There are more complicated ways of doing it, but for right now we're not going to add blend trees or go into separate layers, that sort of thing. So we've got layers, and then we've got parameters. And parameters are basically variables that we can call with our code. It's basically going to turn on and turn off our animations that we have in Blender. So what we're going to do is I'm going to add a couple parameters. And I'm going to use booleans because I just like true false. It's nice and simple, and it's really easy to kind of keep in mind. So we're just going to go enemy walking, enemy walk. Actually, we'll call it enemy to walk on. Okay, boom, because this is my second enemy. If it was a regular enemy, I'd just say enemy walk on. Whoops, enemy to run on. So the idea is these booleans are testing for the run or the walk or whatever to be turned on. Enemy to let's see here, what am I forgetting? dying on. Trying to remember here which one what I'm forgetting here. Let's go back to my project, enemy 2. Go back to my walk, running, dying. Oh, you know what I didn't do is I didn't do a melee attack. Usually I do a melee attack in here, but that's all right. So we've just got these three. We don't have to create a Boolean for the idle because the idle is basically going to be the absence of all the other animations. So I could do a melee attack where he like smashes the character with the butt of his gun or something like that. It's whatever. But you'll get the idea from doing this. So we're going to create our state, and I'm going to create a new empty state. And this first one that you create is actually going to be very different from all the others because this is going to be your idle state. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to type it enemy to idle. Boom. Okay. And it's orange. All the others will be a different color. And then here in your motion, you're going to click the little target. And now you can see a list of all the animations. And it's kind of cool. Blender has Unity has a bunch of animations. And now you see why I wanted to have my enemy 2 and enemy and all this sort of stuff. I've got a lot of different animations in here. Humanoid crouch, humanoid fall, humanoid idle, all that other stuff. So I've got two enemies. I've got a robot enemy and I've got this enemy number 2. So this is the one we've been working on as enemy 2. So here you can see the animations that I've got. Enemy 2 dying, idle, running, walking. So I'm just going to select my idle. Done. And now this state here is the idle. Pretty simple. We're not done yet, of course. It's not even close, but we got a good set. So let's create states for all of our animations. So I'm just going to create, so this one will be walking, okay, this one will be running, and then this one will be the dying. And then I would have like a melee attack in there or something like that. Now one of my biggest issues with this is you can't zoom in and out. That's actually really frustrating to me. Unity, if you're listening, I wish I could zoom in and out, but you can't. So let's take this one and let's make this one enemy 2 walking. Okay, just like that. This one here is enemy 2 dying. Nice and simple. And then this one here is enemy 2 running. And like I said, I would normally do like a melee attack or something like that. So now what we need to do is we need to tell the animation controller to do a transition from one of these to another. So from enemy to idle to walking, and then back, because it's conceivable that you would go from an idle to a walk and a walk back to an idle. We also will do a transition from enemy idle to enemy running and back. Now, we will have a transition from walking to or running to walking and back from walking to running. And then finally, we can do transitions from walking or running to dying, from walking to dying, and theoretically from idle to dying. But since dying is going to end the animation and the character is done after that, we would not have transitions going back. So this is a one-way road, right? Okay, death is a one-way road. It's a little depressing to think about, but you get the idea. So now what we need to do is we need to define what's going to happen. We've defined the animations. We're going to define when those animations will occur. So I'm going to click on the transition itself, and now we have a list of conditions. And we'll go over some of this stuff in just a second. But we have our list of conditions. And so I've got 3 conditions here, 3 Booleans. So I'm going to add 1, 2, and 3. And then I'm going to select run on and dying on. Now for my walking transition, we're going to have dying is false, run is false, but walk is true. I think you probably already see where this is going. So now we click the transition back from walking to idle. 1, 2, 3. Add my conditions here. Dying is false, running is false, and walking is also false. So now the lack of those 3 conditions will send us back to idle. All right, so now we're going to go to running. Same idea. Boom, whoops, boom, boom. There we go. So now I'm going to add these, run and dying and false, and false on walking, but running is true. So now we're going to do the exact opposite. 1, 2, 3, and here we go. Run, dying is false, running is false, and walking is false. So now the lack of those three things is going to cause it to go back to idle. So now we want to go from walking to running. So I'm going to add 2, 3, dying, running. And so now walking will be false and dying will be false, but running is true. And we go back and we do the same thing. It's really tedious, but in a lot of ways it's really cool, because I can only imagine the amount of coding that you would have to do in order to create a controller like this from scratch, right? I mean, that would be a lot of work. So it's kind of nice that it's really just this easy to just drag and drop. So now finally, from running to dying, 1, 2, 3, set your parameters, dying true, running and walking false. Same thing here, 1, 2, 3. And I like to set them all in the same order every time. I just do it exactly the same. And that way it's really easy if like something messes up. It's really easy for me to kind of go through and figure out what my screw-ups were. So, you know, whereas if you change the order every time or whatever, it can get really difficult to kind of see your mistakes. So, oh, now, I haven't actually assigned my animations here, really. So, first we're going to click walking, and I'm going to click the target here and go enemy walking. Enemy 2 walking, no less, because it's a different enemy. And go back here. We're going to reassign enemy 2 running. And then here, enemy 2 dying. All right. So now we've got that kind of set. Now, let's take a look at a couple more things that we have to do here in order for this to work. Number 1. If you click on an animation, one of the things that you'll notice is you've got some options here, and they are very cool. First thing is your speed. So if you have an animation that's a little bit fast or a little slow, or you want it to be slower or faster, whatever. 1 is normal time, so you could go 2 would be like twice as fast, or you can say 0.5 or 0.4 or whatever to slow an animation down. You also have a thing here where it's called foot IK. And foot IK is really helpful, and especially if you have a humanoid figure. As that figure is walking, it'll try and keep those feet stable on the ground. So we want to click that, and we'll set that for all of these. I think my speeds are pretty good. We can go back and adjust them once we test this after we get through the process of writing the code and everything like that. With dying, foot IK probably doesn't matter so much, actually. So now we're going to go to the transitions. We have some options there. And the first thing is has an exit time. So this means that the animation would have to complete before you could transition to the next one. Well, that you generally don't want, because you don't want it to wait for the end of the idle to go, right? You don't want it to sit here. If I hit play, like it's going to play the whole idle animation, and then it will start to walk. Well, that's frustrating. You want it to walk as soon as you hit the keys, right? So as soon as you hit W, you want it to walk. So you're going to uncheck that it has exit time on all of these, pretty much. The only time that you're not going to have that is with an animation that has to finish before you can start. So maybe a jump, that would be something, or dying. Actually, no, we do want an exit time there. We just have no transition back. So, you know, the dying is fine, but a jump, you might not want to transition from a jump to a run until you would actually land it back on the ground. So that might be something that you would have to be mindful of. It also looks like my character might be floating here a little bit on the animation, so we'll just see what happens. Boom. Yeah, well, we'll have to play with that. Let's see what the foot IK might change that. So anyway, now we've got our animations, and you can actually, you know, kind of play with the transitions, and it will show you how it walks and then starts to run. The other thing that you can do that's really cool before I sign off for the rest of this demo, oh, actually, I've got one other thing to show you, is you can actually start to shift and change these transitions to make them more abrupt, a little more gradual, and just really play with how they'll blend into each other, and, you know, make them a little longer, a little shorter, whatever. And it's really cool to play with those and kind of make those happen really nice. Now, Let me go back to my first enemy character and just kind of give you a quick illustration. Now this is a stupid, simple little robot dude that I built. You can see I've got, let's see, I don't have an animation controller for him yet, I don't think. But if I go back to my rig, you'll see that it's set to generic. And this was because this model here did not have the right inverse kinematics. And what ended up happening, if I just put it here, it's just some stupid robot that I built in like 10 minutes. I mean, I'm not kidding you, 10 minutes. It has like these little laser cannons for arms. And so what happened is I didn't put a hand bone at the end, which now, knowing what I know, I probably would have done, because even though there's empty air there, because that would have allowed Unity to see the humanoid inverse kinematic rig that I had built, and it would have made for a much easier job of animating the rig. But because I did it the way I did it, it without the hands, it didn't like that. It didn't like that at all, and it really messed things up. But even though that's the case, you can still do it. So as you can see here, I have all of these animations, and I can play them. And you have everything kind of set up right, okay? And you can set these up in an animation controller just exactly the same way as I did with the other enemy. The real thing is, like, let's say if I were to just create a new animation controller really quickly here. So create a new controller. We'll call this enemy 1 controller, okay? And let's go back to my enemy. We've got a prefab there, so let's drag him into the prefab, replace. Okay, and now we've got that. Let's see, so where's my controllers? Enemy 1. Now, the real important thing is, if I double click on that, so I've got the same exact thing that I have. So if I create my first state here, and this is my enemy 1 idle state, and here under my motion, you'll see I've got my enemy idle. With the other character I have, with the humanoid, I could play with all these different jump forward and left, jump up. I mean, Unity has all these animations for you that are pretty much pre-packaged. If I were to, however, choose one of these and add it to a character that's a generic, what's going to end up happening, well, I don't know what's going to happen. It probably isn't going to work very well because it doesn't understand the rigging. And so that's a really important thing to keep in mind. If you do a character that's not a humanoid, you're kind of on your own as far as the animation's concerned, which is fine. I mean, that's totally okay, especially if you know how to animate in Blender and you can come up with all the animations yourself, and you just take those clips and you add them in here, and then you're good to go. So it's actually really easy to kind of create your own animations so that you have something like this that works well in Unity, even though the rig is actually not your traditional humanoid rig. You just have to kind of realize you're going to have to create all your own animations. But if you do have a rig that is humanoid, especially something from Fuse or Mixamo or something like that, know that you can also choose all those humanoid animations that Unity has that comes prepackaged with it. So anyway, so that's the end of that for this demo. What we're going to do next is, once we've got the characters all set up in the controllers, I'm going to go over how we create or take the characters, we add rigid bodies and all that sort of thing to them, and start talking about how we work with our code. So hopefully that'll be an exciting next demonstration for you. Thank you for spending the time, and hopefully you learned a lot and you enjoyed it.